King Solomon built one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. In the course of his doing so, he acquired the skill and expertise of a man named Hiram from far in the north at Tyre on the coast in Lebanon. He built Solomon's temple. The Bible says in 1 Kings chapter 7 that Hiram was a widow's son. His mother was of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father a man of Tyre, a worker in brass. On today's program, we're going to talk about the twin towers of Solomon's temple. Gary Stearman is here to discuss this incredible feat.
Incredible feat it was, JR, and this program is going to be all about ritual symbolism. Now remember that term, ritual symbolism, because a number of people down through the years have invested a great deal of metaphysical or ritual symbolism in the Temple of Solomon. Hiram, JR, was considered to be the greatest craftsman of the ancient world. Now, there are many legends, extra-biblical legends about Hiram. He's called Hiram Abif, and he was supposed to be beyond, almost beyond human knowledge in his skill and wisdom. And here's the key. Many people believe that Hiram obtained his knowledge, the knowledge that he used to design Solomon's temple, from the ancient esoteric wisdom that came from the people before the flood. In other words, Solomon hired Hiram from the king of Tyre with the explicit knowledge that this man could bring wisdom that he, Solomon, did not possess. That's the legend. Now, that's not what the Bible says.
And that's not what we believe.
And that's not what we believe.
But this is the legend.
The legend.
Okay, now listen to the description of these 2 towers. For he cast 2 pillars of brass of 18 cubits high apiece, and a line of 12 cubits did encompass either of them about. And he made 2 chapiters of molten brass, and set upon the tops of the pillars. The height of the one chapiter was 5 cubits, and the height of the other chapiter was 5 cubits. And nets of checker work and wreaths of chain work for the chapiters which were on the top of the pillars, 7 for the one chapiter and 7 for the other chapiter, and he made the pillars. And 2 rows round about. In other words, he really ornamented this thing with gold and silver, wreaths and flowery designs over these. These were incredible pillars. And then they were named Jachin and Boaz. Now, Gary, this has a meaning.
Yes.
He will establish this, he will make the establishment in Boaz, or strength. So this really is a reference to the coming Messiah to set up the kingdom.
Absolutely. Jachin in Hebrew, Jachin is a compound verb. And it's also used as a proper noun at times, but here it's used as a compound verb, meaning he will establish. And so in 1 Kings 7:21, he set up the pillars of the porch of the temple. He set up the right pillar, called the name thereof Jachin, he will establish. And he set up the left pillar and called the name thereof Boaz. Now, Boaz is a common word for strength, but it can also be used prepositionally. And so you combine these 2 columns and you have a little sentence. He will establish in strength. And these 2 pillars, JR, are standing up and supporting the lintel. Basically, they are the key to the support of the temple, but they have a distinct messianic message in them.
Now imagine these 2 pillars, 51 feet high. That's one estimate for the height of those. I mean, tremendous molten brass. That is, they molded the thing out of molten brass.
Solid brass.
Absolutely incredible, nothing like it before. It's hard to even imagine it, and it was of such glorious appearance.
JR, these pillars were cast brass. They would be about 7 feet in diameter and about maybe 50, some people say 51, 52 feet, a fraction. And they were overlaid with gold and silver and then they were erected with elaborate foundations and elaborate capstones. And all of this engraved with incredible symbolic meaning. Now,
Yes.
we know the story of Boaz.
Yes, let's take the name Boaz for a moment and look at the significance of Boaz and his name and the meaning of these two columns. Go ahead.
Well, Boaz is, in the book of Ruth, he is called the kinsman redeemer. And Boaz, as you know, in this, the most beautiful love story probably in the history of written language, in which Boaz took Ruth for his bride on the night of Pentecost at the harvest festival. And this whole thing is imbued with amazing symbolism, messianic symbolism, in which Boaz becomes a picture of Christ, the kinsman redeemer, Ruth a picture of the redeemed, and Pentecost the picture of the birth of the whole redemption movement. And so Boaz, J.R., is nothing more or less than a type of Christ as Messiah.
Now, before there were two pillars in front of Solomon's temple, there were twin towers in the days before the flood. Flavius Josephus says that Seth, the son of Adam, invented a peculiar wisdom that God had given to him of the gospel and the stars, concerned the heavenly bodies and their order, and that their inventions might not be lost before they were sufficiently known upon Adam's prediction that the world was to be destroyed at one time by the force of fire and at another time by the violence and quantity of water. They made two pillars. That sure smacks of Jachin and Boaz, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And it says one of brick, the other of stone. They inscribed their discoveries on them both. And in the case of the pillar of brick should be destroyed by the flood, the pillar of stone might remain and exhibit those discoveries to mankind, and also inform them that there was another pillar of brick erected by them. And now this remains in the land of Syria to this day, and he wrote that in the 1st century, only 2,000 years ago. So one of these pillars still stands. And I would have to suggest that that would be the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Absolutely, and I think there's virtual universal agreement that the stone pillar containing the arithmetic, astronomic knowledge of the ancients still stands in Egypt today. The brick pillar was destroyed in the flood, and after the flood, apparently the men of Babylon attempted to rebuild that pillar so that there would once again be two pillars standing.
Yes.
These two pillars of wisdom. And so we have here the beginning of a legend, and the legend is that in the two pillars there is hidden esoteric knowledge, the keys to building, if you will, the kingdom on earth. And the man who knows these esoteric secrets is the man who has the power to bring this off. Now, J.R., this is secular in its origins. It is, and it's mystical, and it is occultic.
Yes.
And it is in direct opposition to the establishment of the kingdom under Messiah, even though it comes out of the same foundational knowledge.
Now, if we go back to the days of Seth, before the flood, they built two towers. One they made of brick, the other of stone. And they were made because of the prediction of two judgments upon the earth, one of flood, one of fire. The word pyramid means fire, so it appears that the Pyramid of Giza was a prophecy of the coming judgment of God by fire. It survived the flood. In fact, 500 years ago, when the Mamluks went into the pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Giza, they found encrusted on the floors and the walls an inch thick, I think it was an inch, half inch to an inch thick, of salt laid down by a flood. Which means that that pyramid was completely underwater. In fact, out in the Saudi Arabian desert, they still find shark's teeth. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. There was once there a flood. So, as we look at these twin towers, the one says, the one of brick says, there's coming a flood. And the other one says, there's coming a fire. And it still stands today outside Cairo, telling us there's coming of fire.
Now, J.R., we've got a break coming up. In the second half of today's program, we're going to discuss the mystical aspects of this pillar of stone that J.R. is talking about. I only have to suggest that once again you pull a dollar bill out of your pocket, look at the back, and you will see that mystical pyramid with an eye hovering above it. And that is a symbol that is extremely well known throughout the ages and throughout the world, and it ties in with our study today.
Yes. So we go from those two ancient towers to the twin towers of Solomon's temple to the World Trade Center. We'll be back in just a moment. Some years ago, I wrote a book entitled Guardians of the Grail and the Men Who Planned to Rule the World. It's the story of the Knights Templar. In 1099, 5 European kings sent their armies with Godfrey de Bouillon to the Holy Land. They drove out the Muslims, set up the Crusader kingdom, which lasted for a century or so, until Saladin in 1188 drove them out. Now, the interesting thing about it is, in 1118, Hughes de Payen and Baldwin, the king of Jerusalem, a Merovingian king, by the way, established this new order of the knights called the Knights of the Temple, the poor Knights of the Temple. There were only 9 of them in 1118. They spent the next 9 years on the Temple Mount, and some say digging up the gold of Solomon's temple. And they found the plans for Solomon's temple, went back to Europe, began to build these temples of Solomon all over everywhere. We call them Gothic cathedrals today. Beautiful architectural design. The interesting thing is the Gothic architecture became the mainstay of this esoteric wisdom that the Knights Templar embellished. And even the twin towers of the World Trade Center have Gothic design.
Absolutely, and there we can establish a track from the year 1099 to the present day. There has been a raging battle for possession of the Temple Mount, J.R.
Yes.
And that raging battle is a 3-way battle. The forces of Europe and the West, let's just call it the Western Alliance, would very much like to internationalize that Temple Mount. This goes back literally to 1099 and the Knights Templar coming from Europe and wanting to reestablish the kingdom in the name of the Holy Roman Empire. Of course, the second faction, believing that it has a claim to the Temple Mount, would be Israel, through the Abrahamic covenant, and through the line of David, believing that it has a claim to Mount Zion. And of course, the whole Old Testament testifies to that claim. The third group claiming that they own the Temple Mount, and you have but to pick up today's newspaper to see that battle going on. It's the Intifada. The Islamics believe that they own the Temple Mount, and this takes us all the way back to this battle for the Mount between the Knights Templar, the Jews, and the Islamic forces that took place back in 1099, because they all hate each other. Let's put it this way. The Crusaders wanted to kill the infidel, and they included in that category both Islamics and Jews. The Islamics wanted to kill the people they considered the infidels, both the Knights Templar and the Jews. And the Knights Templar,
the poor Jews are the ones who originally had a fellow named Solomon who was of the tribe of Judah.
Exactly. Now,
built the temple.
To make this as simple as possible, the Knights Templar stole the secrets of the Solomonic temple and established the order of the Knights Templar, which J.R. became, and there's no doubt about this, a secret order. It was literally the fountainhead of international banking, of world trade, of merchant sea traffic. Historically, there's absolutely no question about it. The direct line of world banking and trade that extends from the Knights Templar to the present day.
Yes. And this is the reason why the World Trade Center was chosen by the terrorists, the Islamic terrorists, to be destroyed, because it was the icon, the very epitome of the twin towers of Solomon's temple, built in Gothic design and now lying in rubble and ruin.
And we have some illustrations you may have noticed yourself. The standing wall, that stark, glaring, smoldering wall, the World Trade Center, was designed as a Gothic piece of work. The Japanese architect Minoru Yamasaki, who designed the World Trade Center specifically at the behest of those who financed it, took Gothic elements and wove them throughout the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center, the world's two tallest towers standing side by side in a north-south alignment, by the way, just as the ancient Jachin and Boaz used to stand. Mm-hmm. And the World Trade Center was the very symbol of esoteric wisdom, of world trade, let's just say it, of religious and commercial Babylon. Now, JR, in 1993, let's just put it this way. The Islamics knew what they were going after. They drove a van under the North Tower and set off 1,500 pounds of nitrate explosives. It wasn't enough to knock the towers down, so they went back, they scratched their heads, and they came up with a way to knock those towers down. In other words, they did not quit. That was their goal. That was their object, to destroy those towers, because they knew of the Templars' belief that the keys to the hidden wisdom, to power, and to the establishment of the kingdom is embodied or locked in the idea of Jachin and Boaz. He will establish in strength. It's a mystical, we talked a moment ago about ritual symbolism. There is a great deal of ritual symbolism going on here.
And Islam was determined that they would bring down the establishment of the kingdom, for they want an Islamic kingdom, a worldwide Islamic kingdom. Our president stood before the United Nations recently, and in the course of his speech, the entire script of which I have here, I want to read one paragraph. Our president said, "The American government also stands by its commitment to a just peace in the Middle East. We are working toward a day when two states, Israel and Palestine, live peacefully together with secure and recognized borders as called for by the Security Council resolutions. We will do all in our power to bring both parties back into negotiations, but peace will only come when all have sworn off forever incitement, violence, and terror." Now, Colin Powell, speaking to the television cameras recently, just following that, an Associated Press article says that Palestine entered the government's lexicon with President Bush's speech to the United Nations. So says Secretary of State Colin Powell. He said, "No Republican president has ever made such a statement, and until now, the State Department has used Palestine only to describe the British-controlled territory that existed before Israel's establishment in 1948. Israel assumed some of the territory, but other parts were controlled by Jordan and Egypt until they were captured by Israel in the 1967 Mideast War." Now, what we have here is, for the first time, the United States has officially gone on record as being in favor of a nation called Palestine. Smacks of Rome, Gary.
Very much so, and JR, the Romans named Palestine for the enemy of Israel, the Philistines. And that name has stuck down to this day. The Western Alliance, the motto of the Western Alliance is divide and conquer. And they're doing a very good job of it right now by dividing the land between Palestine and Israel. JR, I think Isaiah may have referred to the time we're talking about right now. At the end of days, in Isaiah 30:25, there shall be upon every high mountain, upon every high hill, rivers and streams of water in the day of the great slaughter, when the towers fall. And verse 26 says, "Moreover, the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun. The light of the sun shall be sevenfold as the light of 7 days." Isaiah links the idea of falling towers with this conflagration in the sun during the day of the Lord. To me, the towers of which Isaiah speaks here, they may not be a direct reference to the Twin Towers, but towers are Gentile edifices erected in power. And the goal of the Gentiles, as we have seen, is to take over the world, set up their own kingdom. Isaiah says those towers are going to fall.
So, my friend, we do not have just a handful of terrorists causing havoc, temporary havoc. We have on our hands a world war. It may not be called a world war yet, but eventually it will bring the whole world to a place called Armageddon. An awesome thought, Gary.
It is an awesome thought, and remember this, the center is Jerusalem. Zechariah, the prophet, said that he would gather all the nations around Jerusalem, and they would pick over it and fight for it, and they would not be victorious.
Do you know Jesus as your personal Savior? He's coming one of these days to establish the kingdom in strength.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current program on audio tape, or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on videotape. For either order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.